Jonny Holland's with us. Hey, Jonny.
How are you?
Listen, guys, we have an England team. First of all, very, very briefly, Jonny, can we just start with you very briefly, your thoughts this week? Now, like, obviously, the Italy game has passed and stuff. We've had a few days to let everything sink in. The big question, your former position, fly half. What are your overall thoughts after last weekend now as we approach Wednesday and an Ireland team named tomorrow?
Yeah, like, it's been vitriolic, isn't it? And I don't want to add to it, but we have to discuss the topics as well, which is a funny place to be in now as sports people and reporters and all the rest of it. But like, I can't see how it's not a Jameson Gibson Park Jack Crowley combo, and I'm not trying to come down hard on Sam Prendergast. He didn't play his best game objectively, and I've said that in my column, objectively, because it's not a subjective matter in this instance. You know, I think he's a great talent, very good technically. He put up a spiral bomb from a free kick, didn't he? And there was no one getting anywhere near it. I think Lina just decided not to bother, because that's what happens when he kicks the ball like he does. But unfortunately, when technically, his goal kicking wasn't unreal, and then he just looked like he wasn't playing with a massive amount of confidence. And again, when Jack came on and Jameson Gibson Park came on and probably started that pace, and then Jack came in and really leaned into it. So I think, again, going to Twickenham, if I was picking the team, which I'm definitely not, and Andy Farrell has a lot more experience than I do, I'd surely be going with Gibson Park and Jack Crowley. But I do think the reaction to the Sam Prendergast thing has been completely overplayed, and there's been way too much on social media this week. I think it's all gone a bit too far. It's a game, and guys trying to do their best. And
I'm so glad I'm not on it.
Yeah.
But look, to try and move it on a little bit, I thought it was interesting. It does look like Crowley's probably going to start. The team will be named tomorrow, Birch. But Jameson Gibson Park, I thought, 33 years of age, like, he's been there, he's pretty much done everything. And he said this week that when he was dropped, as he saw it dropped, he went and looked for feedback on how to improve. And I thought, geez, that's telling you something about his mindset and what kind of a guy he is.
Yeah, but the top end players are like that. They never want to have it be rested, or if they are being left out, they want assurances that it is rested and not dropped. So, and I think his form hasn't been as good, and that's a very high level. But I thought he showed coming off the bench what he brings to Ireland, and it wasn't just him and Jack. All the bench, as happened in Paris as well. We're getting a much better bang from our bench than we historically did. Now, some of that's down to some of the players on the bench are, you could argue, starters, or starters level, like Conan, for example, in Paris. He got rewarded against Italy. So, and you look at how the international game is going, it's a 23-man game, and those players have to come on. So Gibson Park is still obviously clearly number one, and I would imagine maybe a shock if he doesn't start with Jack.
Yeah, no, he will start, I think, and he brings so much still. I keep waiting for the battery to kind of dilute a little bit, Jonny, in terms of his fitness, but he still offers so much. And if Ireland are to go to Twickenham this weekend and get a result, Jameson Gibson Park has to be at the top of his game. And maybe sitting on the bench last week was the best thing to happen for him and for Ireland.
Yeah, it's obviously worked. I think he was very honest in his interview when he said, someone asked him, is that the rocket that he needed, and he just kind of stopped for a second and said, yeah, and that's a good thing. He didn't try and pawn it off as something else, so he was disappointed. And like Bernard said, I actually think Craig was due a start, and Jameson Gibson Park's form wasn't the height of his form in the past. So I think it was worthwhile doing it, but I think we got the answer in that he is the starter for Ireland, and there's no doubt about that.
Do you know, it's very easy to see how someone in his position, and I don't care who you are, but like, if you're constantly being picked and everyone acknowledges what a brilliant player you are and your performance, like, complacency eludes nobody. You don't care how good you are. Sometimes complacency just sets in, and you might say, no, that's not me, and I'm always a professional, but it's a human trait that can happen, and it can happen to anyone.
Yeah, and particularly he was the Lions test starter, so he's had a high pressure summer. He's obviously, there's a lot of pressure on him to be the go-to player, because what he brings is unbelievable speed, unbelievable awareness around the breakdown. So he has to be bang on, whereas, like, no disrespect, a tight head lock, if they're gifted physically, they can do a lot of what they do every week without any big stress, whereas Gibson Park needs to be at 100% and play the game at nearly 100 miles an hour, but he makes it look like it's a lot slower because he's so adept at it. So I actually just talking about Craig getting a chance. Absolutely, Craig needs to get a chance, and maybe Craig plays against Wales again. Because Sexton, I think, did press yesterday, and he spoke about that Ireland are trying to do things a little bit differently, and trying to be less one-dimensional in terms of the team that plays. So we need to find out about these players. We need to get them exposure, and Wales now look like the Italy of the past, where that was the game you rotated. So potentially we'll have another chance to have a look at some of the squad and start to get some answers. And maybe, it has been Jack Sam, but maybe we'll get a look at Harry Byrne against Wales as well.
Rory, will you just clip up what Bert said about the Wales team now being the Italy and send it to Wales online there and just see what happens for the reaction among the Wales fans? Johnny, talk to me about, let's focus on England for a minute, but we'll come back to Ireland, right? George Ford. What have you seen about George Ford in this Six Nations that seems like a player reborn to me?
Been like that for a while though, hasn't he? Like, I think there was doubts over him and Marcus Smith being the guy to take over and be this attacking player, but George Ford's decision making, besides the drop goal, his decision making, like when he put Arundel in for the score, that's exactly what he does. It's just like he sees the tackle line in slow motion and he sees fellas popping out and he puts people into space. So that, I think and his kicking game is so robust as well. But I think that drop goal, they increased the tempo to get into the 22. They kind of started running out of numbers to the point where Rory Darge was probably going to pick off a turnover, and as he was doing, and it's like they're just bottling a step back. They were in full control, and Scotland should have been under pressure. So I didn't like that one. I know he keeps scoreboards ticking over, and he's gone to kind of more traditional routes, but I thought that was a poor one. But other than that, I'm a massive fan of George Ford, and I think he's a coach's player. You know what you're going to get. He can play other people into the team and into space, into tackle line. So that's what he brings, and I think he's selected again, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And Scotland aside last week, he glided around the pitch, and I know against Wales you can say, well, it's not the same opposition, but he has looked like he's taken his performances to another level, I think.
Yeah, he's the most obviously mature of those 310s that they have, which is Finn Smith and Marcus Smith as well. I think he suits Borthwick ball perfectly. Like, he's very, very smart. England don't need him to be good athletes because they've so many other good athletes. They need the brain and obviously his skill set, and I think he's the perfect match for what they want to do. And I thought the selection that they made for this weekend actually makes them better. Freeman is still more of a winger than a 13, but 100%. I can totally understand why they want to see what he can do there, because they have so much choice on the wing. So Fabo Boso is injured. They obviously have Arundel, who keeps his place. They have Roebuck. They have Ollie Haskell-Collins. They have Murley. Like, they have incredible depth there, and they have lots of centres as well. But the Freeman being able to play both wing and 13 at a high level come next World Cup will be massively advantageous to them. And I think bringing Ollie Lawrence in to the centre gives them a lot more power collision. And I actually think they're going to double down on what they try to do against Scotland. But obviously, their game plan isn't suited to being 17-0 down. They're not saying anyone
I know.
But it's really to squeeze teams, and they nearly had to chase the game, which is the worst thing you can do. And in fairness, I thought Scotland adapted tactically against them. So, like, if you look at how Wales kicked the ball out after kick tennis, Scotland refused to kick it out. They counter-attacked. They kicked on their own terms. And it was very, very smart. And there's lessons in that for Ireland, I think.
And I know exactly what you mean, because the game plan seems predicated on exerting complete control on the opposition. They have the players to do it. They have the set piece to do it. They have the pace to do it. And by going 17-0 down, you lose control, and all of a sudden your whole system starts to fall apart. Yeah,
exactly. And I think actually Borthwick, the George Ford drop goal is probably the right thing for them to do to get back into the game, as in it just gets 3 points, and they knew it had a good bench to come on. Obviously, he didn't execute it well, and it's a 10-point swing. But if they're going to chase a game, it'll be 3-6-9 rather than 2 quick tries, you think, and because it's they call it living in the abyss. That's what they want to live in the abyss and be comfortable in the abyss and make the opposition crack. And invariably they do. And in fairness, one result, they obviously have to get a big scalp away from home. Argentina was really good for them. But like, they were brilliant in November. They have been amazing in Twickenham. They were on an 11 match winning streak. It's now broken. But I think in this championship, they won't, if they come out of this championship without a big scalp away from home, I think they'll still be frustrated with where they're going as a team. And obviously the obvious one is Paris on the last day, which looks like a big ask. But unfortunately for France, I think England's game plan kryptonite to what they do. So even though France are playing rugby that's out of this world, and maybe no one's as good as them, England could potentially, the game plan they have potentially could find a weakness in France. Doesn't mean they're better than France, it's just beat them.
No, absolutely. They were brilliant in November, Jonny. And if you think that Fraser Dingwall and Ollie Lawrence were the centre combination for the majority of those November internationals, they know each other, they play very well together. I imagine if you're Ollie Lawrence sitting on the sideline on the bench, not involved in the first two games, saying, hang on, they've taken a winger in and put in my position. He will have so much motivation to go and play well this weekend, surely.
Yeah, he will. And I think that kind of physical confrontation in the middle of the field, I mean, as a kind of an attack coach or whatever, I always think about that because it's not just your power up front. And I'm not sure if England are giving away some power in their back row. I wouldn't see it as giving away power. They're obviously playing differently. They've three fetchers, so to speak, and they've three guys that are going to destroy breakdowns and just be an absolute thorn in the Irish attacking game. But you also need to balance that across the pitch, and I think Ollie Lawrence coming in there gives them another kind of angle on that. You do need, as Bernard said, like a little bit of power, winning collisions in midfield, and if you're big front five and then a kind of dynamic back row, you do need someone in the middle of the field to bring that for you as well. So and as you say, there's plenty of people with a point to prove this weekend, and he'd be one of them. And for Ireland, I think it's kind of a battle of like two structured game plans, structured in different ways. Ireland are very structured around their numbers across the pitch and how they use them. Now they make decisions around that too, but they're not unstructured in the way that Italy, Scotland, France can be in their attack. So it's two of the more structured games, I would say, going up against each other. England's is just more blunt than Ireland's is, and I do think Ireland need to increase the pace and take England out of their comfort zone. Any
worries about Ringrose form? And I say that because he missed 4 tackles last weekend. We know that Lawrence and Dingwall work as a centre combination. Ireland centres are going to need to play very well this weekend. McCluskey, we know, is in the form of his life. Ringrose maybe just needs to kind of step up a little bit, does he?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's very hard to judge some of those missed tackles because it seems, certainly with Leinster, he has a licence to shoot, and he does send people back into areas that Leinster can pounce on him. It hasn't really been as kamikaze with Ireland, but so I would say it's probably those missed tackles are more worrying. Certainly his effort and his intent is massive. It's just he probably is not as accurate as he probably was a year or two ago. We're pretty light on 13s, obviously with Tom Farrell who's in great form for Munster, but behind that there's not a lot coming. It was interesting to see Bundy back training with Ireland yesterday, and obviously he's available now for the Wales game. Not saying he's going to be 13, but just it's another centre option. But McCluskey's rejuvenation or his improvement,
it's astounding,
year on year. It's incredible to be playing the best rugby of his life at the same age. We're questioning others, and to have been like in Irish squads for so long and sent home every Wednesday because Bundy, Robbie, and Gary were ahead of him. And now he's like our go-to player. In actual fact, if you're watching from the outside and you said who are the kind of spiritual leaders of Ireland at the moment, you'd say Jack Conan and Stuart McCluskey. In terms of the players that they're the two people that players are looking to when they're on the pitch, when they're looking for a go forward or for calmness. And that's brilliant for him. Obviously, he has an offloading game, which is different than all the other players, bar low, you would say. And the offload has become such a big part of the game. So it's great to have McCluskey there. I think Ringrose is obviously a proven player, but yeah, he's going to have a big defensive questions asked of him, as we all are on Saturday.
Do you expect the back three to remain the same, Jonny, in regards to Osborne at full-back and then James Lowe, again, a bit like Gibson Park, looked like, right, I understand why I was dropped, and he responded so well last weekend.
I thought the back three were class, and I couldn't see that being changed. Yeah, I thought Robert Balakoon took his opportunity really well. He shows he's a point of difference. Very strong in the air. James Lowe was, I think he had his best game in a long while. I think that's an understatement, really. I know his form hasn't been great, but like if you go back a couple of years even, I thought he had a really standout performance. And you're going to have to be good in the air as well against England. Like they're going to kick the ball clearly. So having guys who are going to take the ball in the air, win that aerial battle, not allow them to have transition is going to be crucial. So I can't see it changing at all. I've been talking with Robert Balakoon for a while, quietly, because I'd preview an AL game or something, and I'd see him on the pitch with Ballinhinch, and then he'd be back in Ulster, and then he'd get an injury, and back in Ballinhinch, and I was always going, this guy, like we talk about not having speed in the Irish game, even though Tommy O'Brien Ryan is a former sprinter, isn't he? But people don't give him the credit for it. But Balakoon, how he moves, like his short steps into contact, he gets away. His try was outstanding, you know. So I'd be a massive fan of him, and I'd love if Ireland could develop his talent even more and make him even more confident, I think, because I wouldn't say he's the most confident player in the world. I don't know him obviously personally, but the way he was playing the game, he was in and out.
That'll come though, won't it? Like with more miles on the clock and more
That's
game
what I mean,
time and
like,
belief.
you know,
Yeah.
Yeah, you keep him in there and he's going to be a real threat. Like, you know, he's a class player.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the last things you said on Monday night on Against the Head was the best thing for Ireland would be if Pollock stays on the bench. He's starting, Birch. I think somebody clipped it up, sent it to Borthwick and said, right, I'm going to show that fella. Look, I agree with you. I think this guy could be phenomenal.
Yeah.
And himself and Curry as an option, which Borthwick I think sees almost as a pairing in the back row. I think we could see what this kid is all about this weekend.
Yeah, so there is a bit of a shift. I think Borthwick's a dad coach, right? And they actually, I suppose, achieved a lot of the metrics that they normally would achieve that leads to wins. The Scotland game was a very weird game. Like every bounce of the ball went Scotland's way. Now Scotland played brilliantly as well. Don't get me wrong, but also England were without a left winger for 30 minutes of that game, and Scotland's wide game exposed that. And England had 12 what they call 22 entries, and normally that would lead to wins for them. Like they normally convert them. So he hasn't panicked. He's kept the same front five.
Yeah.
But the difference is that he's been relying on what he called a POM squad, right? So that bench, whether it's Pollock or whether it's Curry or impact coming off the bench late in games and then pushing on and closing out games or coming from behind if they were slightly behind. Whereas it looks like now he's saying, well, look, Pollock is wasted. Like there was no point Pollock and Curry coming on last week
Because the game is gone.
Game's gone. Now I know I said it was an outlier, but he wants them on from the start. And Pollock, for me, which you've got Ben Earl's carry, you've got Curry's work rate power, and then you have Pollock's, I suppose, box of tricks. Really, he's a player that makes things happen.
Confident, Birch. He's so confident.
But he's effective. Like his try scoring ability, his line break ability, his footballing ability. I think they're better with him in the team, to be honest. And the problem is he has to prove this as a starter because the vast majority of his rugby is being off the bench, even for Northampton. But he's so good at that. And for me, I think England with the players he has around him, it's worse for Ireland that he starts. I think he's exceptional.
There's a brilliant story, Jonny, that Steve Borthwick told about the first time he met Henry Pollock. He went down to watch Northampton train and to be part of the training set up on the pitch at the time, and this young guy with blonde hair ran up to Borthwick, put his hand, how are you, mate? How's things? It kind of reminded me of Simon Zebo when he was that age, just full of confidence, full of belief in his own ability, and he transfers that to the pitch. Like, he's very exciting. If you're an England fan, he's very exciting.
Honestly, I think for any fan, not this weekend, but for any fan, he's very exciting. Like, I love watching him. He's the energy that he brings, like that. Some people bring this kind of fake energy, and players do appreciate energy around them. But sometimes you're like, oh, will you just stop?
Pipe down,
you know? Stop. But he brings energy to his own team. If you watch the game at the beginning when he came on, Tui Paladu all of a sudden is distracted by him because he's just trying to get into his ear. He's trying to, play the game with him, and sure he does that to opposition players as well. I'd say he's just so annoying, So like, I love what he's doing. I love how he backs himself. Listening to other shows during the week, like, he's taking over young fellas' minds. Like, he's bringing something to rugby that we don't always have, and he's backing himself up. I'm actually just shocked it's his first start. I didn't really think about that. It seems mad that it is. He's been, in our faces for 18 months now, and it's a bit mad his first start. But it'll be interesting because he's going to get, Ireland players will focus on him now from the start, as opposed to going, he's on the bench, I'll deal with him later on. They will probably have some treatment for him too, and some way to kind of quieten him down and maybe get at some of his weaknesses. And sometimes our strengths are our weaknesses. So whatever he's going to do in terms of bringing energy and trying to get after guys, they might use him as a way to get into England as well. But I'm glad that's Andy Farrell and his coaching team's problem and not mine, because he's a very good player. It's
a frightening in the back. I mean, I think that's their best back row. Tom Curry, Ben Earl switching, and then Pollock as well. Like, they're all interchangeable. They can all play any position across the back row. And we have a very good back row as well. It's going to be fascinating to see who wins that battle at the weekend.
Yeah, and I think the back rows are going to rely on what happens on the gain line and what happens at set piece. So obviously England have gone with the same front five. Their scrum on average is they're winning 30%. Every scrum, for every 100 scrums they have, they get 30 penalties. Like,
really,
they are
1 in 3 return.
1 in 3, and then obviously they can kick to the corner. Their maul is phenomenally strong. and Chesham, Maro Toje, Ellis Genge in the form of his life. Joe Hayes is probably the best, most improved player in the Premiership, and then Luke Cowan-Dickey with Jamie George to come on. It's a very, very meaty pack, and that back row probably on the front foot can do serious damage. Like Ben Earl's carrying is incredibly impressive. Different than Pollock. Ben Earl's more about power. Pollock has a lot of pace and I said footballing ability. But I think England. I looked at a Scotland game 3 or 4 times, and I wouldn't question where England are going. I think they're on the right track, and also they have massive depth. So the two teams who have the best depth in this competition are France and England. Jesus, and that will pay off over time.
That's a really interesting point. And when you mentioned Ellis Genge, of course, the try that he coughed up, he doesn't make those kind of mistakes. There's another 7-point swing. Yeah. So all of a sudden, when you deconstruct the game as a whole and you look to the visits of the 22 by England, the opportunities that they had that didn't take, the yellow card to Arundel, the 20 minutes without the wing, the mistake from Genge, and all of a sudden, right, there's nothing. There's nothing.
Yeah, but Hugh, the beauty of international rugby at the moment is there's actually, bar Wales at the moment, there's very little between any teams. And look at the Rugby Championship. Like, for me, South Africa are the best team in the world, right? So their record over the last while, what they did in November, now they didn't play France, but what they did in November is outstanding, what they did in the Rugby Championship. But after the Rugby Championship this year, after the first 4 rounds, each of the teams had lost 2 games. Yeah. So you can lose. Yeah. You can lose. Like England, like South Africa got beaten by Australia. You know what I mean? In South Africa.
Yeah.
That's how quickly things can turn.
Yeah.
Now South Africa learned the lesson from that, and they actually overplayed, and it was a good thing for them to learn, and that led to the run they went on afterwards. I think England would have learned plenty from Scotland without throwing out what they're built on, their foundations. I was interested. Steve Borthwick, it's so basic, and it sounds nearly embarrassing to say it, but like I saw him interviewed, and he talked about when he came into that team in 2001. So he was around that World Cup winning team.
Yeah.
Right? He wasn't in it, but he was around it. And basically the posters on the wall were brilliant basics, and they chased that, right? And then he talked about, after the Eddie Jones era, which obviously ended badly, he talked about getting back to playing English rugby, right? And ironically, as he says, English rugby, what he sees English rugby as being, which is set piece, defence, territory, is actually what wins you games at international level, right? So now everyone knows that, but they can't all do it because you don't have the set piece.
You need all the ingredients.
Defense, and you don't have the territory, right? Or you don't have the kickers or the ability to squeeze teams and play territory. But he has doubled down on that. It suits England. It suits the player profile that he brings into the team. The only one it doesn't really suit is Arundel. Arundel's a little bit of a left field call. Now, obviously, he's got unbelievable attacking ability and pace.
What about his area? What about under the high ball?
No, his area isn't good. So that's unusual for him to pick him, because he has been picking wingers more often than not who are very good in that area, and that's obviously why Freddie Stewart plays at fullback. But obviously, if you're playing Freddie Stewart, you probably want to have a lot of pace either side of him, and obviously Arundel has an incredible amount of pace, and it seems to be the trend. Like obviously France have 2, but every team now is looking for, I think what in sevens called a wheelman. Yeah. One out and out pace merchant. Yeah. Who, when the game breaks up, can be your point of difference. And maybe that's why Arundel is in there, particularly with Faye Boso out at the moment.
If you were coaching Jack Crowley this weekend then, Jonny, and we know Arundel's very quick, but he's not great under the high ball. It is a bit of a weakness to his game. Are you looking to target that? Are you going to put pressure on it? Are you just going to bomb the ball down his throat and see how he goes? And bearing in mind that he's coming off the back of being sent off, very disappointed with his performance. We hear blamed himself for a lot of what went wrong, and obviously to go off the pitch as well. Are you targeting him this weekend?
No, of course you are. Now he might have the answers for it because he's now more focused than he was last week. But I'm actually shocked he's selected. It doesn't seem like a very Steve Borthwick thing to do. Like to leave them a man down for 30 minutes, which is a hard thing to actually do. Yeah. The yellow card, second yellow card into 20 minutes. But also on top of that, the work rate back for Ellis Genge to kind of lose that ball for the try. He was fairly well kind of targeted on social clips. And when I saw it, I hadn't seen the game yet. So I was like, oh, maybe he had made a run or he had done repeated efforts and he's an explosive character. He can run out of juice. But he had been yellow carded and it wasn't that far into the game. I was absolutely shocked that was his effort to try and get back on his wing. So I think you'd be talking about turning England you might kick the ball along the ground actually instead of in the air to Freddie Stewart. So if you can find attacking kicks, you might actually get in behind Arundel, make Freddie Stewart kind of turn and then see what they're about. Because obviously Arundel didn't have the work rate at the weekend to turn either, so maybe that's an area they can get after. But I think you'll always get the ball into the air, get someone like Robert Balakoon into the air and try and break that ball back and make them play in transition, because again England were so uncomfortable with Scotland in transition. So yeah, you can use a player like him on his wing to kick the ball. I don't think you have to blend it with your attacking game, that when you want to kick,
you can't just focus on that. Obviously you've got to have variety and make them think about it.
Yeah, of course. And you're going to and if you attack well, you put him into awkward situations where he doesn't know if he's closing or if he can be comfortable on his wing. So I think if you can do more on the inside, bring the pace of the game up, and then you can. I think that's where the attacking kicks along the ground might actually come into play as well. You get Freddie Stewart closing really hard, Arundel maybe not getting back as well to help them out. It'll be interesting because obviously there's many ways to skin a cat at international rugby. With a kicking game, there's probably not that many. There's a couple, but you can take one or two approaches to it. You can go flat out into the air on him, but I don't think you'll be going into the air as much on Freeman maybe, but Freddie Stewart can be very, very dominant in the air too. So you're going into a battle that he may win. So I think there is definitely something around Arundel's wing that you can manipulate. Yeah.
Speaking of into the air, Tyke Furlong was like a hot air balloon at one stage during the scrum. Obviously, the pictures are well documented. This is the last area I want to talk about, the front row and the scrum and what Italy did. Do you expect, for example, maybe Tom O'Toole to come in? Do you expect Kelleher to start? How do you think Farrell will address the issues of Italy last weekend in the scrum?
Yeah, there's obviously some technical issues. We again, very like South Africa, we failed to keep that hooker honest, and there's a mixture of the loose head and our own hookers' ability to dominate there. So the tight head is getting fairly exposed, and that's not excusing Tyke. Tyke will be horrified by what actually happened there. It's weird at the moment. Ireland, there's like when you look at the Italian scrum, and I'm doing a piece for pre-match, like everybody is completely committed and on the same page and technically accurate. Whereas in our scrum, there's varying body heights, there's varying leg movements, there's varying angles. It's a horrific sight. Unfortunately, we fixed it to a certain extent against France, but I think we have to, we saw France-Wales. France's scrum at the moment is the weakest part of their game, and to such an extent they've actually brought Rabah Slimani back in this week because of Italy, so and like long term Rabah isn't the answer for France, but they're worried about their scrum against Italian scrum, and that's credit to Italy. But we have things technically we need to do better, and as I said, England will smell blood there, and if we're not better, so I personally would go with Kelleher. I think Dan off the bench will be brilliant this week, and even though Kelleher was on the pitch for that really bad scrum, I think him, Tig, I'd even go Finney Bealham on the bench because he's actually our best scrummaging tight head. So if it did take off in a negative way, you'd have someone to come on who could potentially fix that. And I would go with Tom O'Toole.
Would you?
I would. It's a gamble, I know, but again, we need to find out what we have. We know we have Paddy McCarthy. We know we've Andrew Porter. We know we've Jack Boyle on that side. There's a rumour that Porter may end up going back across the tight head over the next while. And then O'Toole as a hybrid that can play both well, I think is an interesting prospect. I thought the way Farrell spoke about him after the game, I know they looked at him to play him against France at Loosehead and obviously backed off on that. But I think there's a strong chance he'll get game time again this week, whether it's to start or come off the bench.
That's interesting about Porter going back potentially to tight head. Is that because Paddy McCarthy's coming through and they have God, what's his name escaping me now? The other loosehead, Jack Boyle as well. So they see they're well stacked at loosehead.
Yeah, look, I think they're well stacked at loosehead. Obviously, Tig and Finney Bealham, post next World Cup.
Are they going to be around?
Who knows? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And more than likely, over the next 2 or 3 years, they're not going to be around. So, Thomas Clarkson's done well, but you probably want to have a little bit more depth there. Focus referees on Porter as a loose head. You just change that completely. You take him out of it. It's interesting. Actually, talking to tight heads, my understanding is Jack Ainger is definitely going to Munster.
Right.
So what does that mean for Munster? Do Munster now still get a foreign tight head? Do they stick with Alatoa? Obviously, it's a nice addition for them. What do Connacht do on that? So there's a little bit of movement around the Irish provinces. Not as much probably as certain people would like, but there has been with Devine going to Ulster, Frawley going to Connacht. Ainger now going to Munster.
Bit of movement.
Yeah, and obviously Will Connors as well going to.
Yeah, it's good to see. Just on the hooker issue, Jonny, before we leave it, like, would you subscribe to the front that Dan Sheehan's he's just not in great form at the moment for whatever reason, and maybe it's time to change things up and Kelleher deserves a start?
Yeah, I think it's been hard because I also thought there might have been, long season, Lions tour, etc., a lot of pressure carrying them for quite a while. Not carrying them, but, been an outstanding kind of performer every week. As you said earlier, I think that can, you can grow tired of that as well. So sometimes you can't get yourself out of that funk. I'm not sure, but like Dan Sheehan has still been, up there as one of the better players. So I'm not sure. It's a really big call, but I wouldn't see any issue with reversing that. I know Jack Conan said in the media, like, Lions hangover doesn't exist. Whether it doesn't exist or players are trying to convince themselves it doesn't, like there's obviously some spark missing there with some of our top performers. So
I think just on that, I think there's a stat that every year after a Lions tour since going back bar 2 for the last, I don't know how many, 40, 50 years, France have won the championship. So like, there's obviously something in it. Bar 2, France have won the championship every year in the Six Nations following a Lions tour. So whether the players say it or not, that statistic is there.
Yeah, but I think we need to get out of the Dan Sheehan not starting this week. Oh, Dan Sheehan's dropped.
No.
Oh, but the reality is Kelleher's a double line. Okay, so he was a test line in South Africa.
It's not a bad step down, is it?
Yeah, there's very little between them.
Yeah,
and I remember I did something with Stephen Kitchoff, and he was explaining the Springbok culture on the Razzie, whatever, right? And he was obviously a prop, and he said for certain games, Razzie would get the 6 front rowers he named us 23, but he wouldn't name a starting team. He'd get a 6 front rowers in a room, depending on the 6 front rowers, and he'd say, lads, there's so little between you guys. You decide who starts. Okay, now it's incredible now. I'm not saying we have to get to that level, right? But it shows you how far they had gone down that route of depth and culture. And he said often he wasn't the other guy. The other guy put his hand up first, said I'm starting, and it was him and Mark's coming off the bench. And I'm not saying we get to that level, but ideally you would be at that level where there's so little between your 1 and 2, ideally your 1, 2, 3, that effectively it doesn't matter, or it's horses for courses. For me, the reason, I'm not saying Dan Sheehan's in bad form, the reason I would go with Kelleher this week is I think Scrum is going to be absolutely crucial. And also I like the idea of Dan giving us the impact that the likes of Conan, James Ryan has done over the last couple of weeks. Yeah,
well, there you go. Any South African listeners, there's your headline for tomorrow. Jackman says, Razzie passes the buck. Afraid to make the big calls in the big games.
There's no more ruthless coach.
I know. It is amazing.
It's that balance. Yeah. It's that balance. Yeah. And in fairness, he did say if there was someone in there who wasn't as good, like he didn't do it every week. Yeah. It depended on the 6. Yeah. So if there was 5 who were better, he'd say actually hookers you can decide, loose heads you can decide, tight head. Matt Herber, you're starting. Right, okay. So it's not it's not a freebie.
No, I get you. No, absolutely. Which is fascinating as well. Look, finally, like what are your give me your gut feeling, Jonny, this weekend? All things being equal, our best players step up, England's best players step up. It's going to be a fascinating test match. I can't wait for it, I have to say.
It's going to be very intense, and I think it'll be one of those that we'll remember. But just on even on the set piece thing, like Kelleher may start for the scrum, but I also wonder about the lineout as a result. Will he take a small bit away? It's kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I think Maro Itoje is his 100th
cap
for England, is it?
Yeah.
He was quiet last week. I think he's going to be an absolute menace around that lineout, and I think Ireland will have a battle. In the set piece up front. So I think Ireland will play really well. I think they'll have a performance that they can stand over, but I think going against England and Twickenham after losing to Scotland, I'm not sure I can see it happening.
Okay, lovely. On that bombshell, we will leave it. It's live on RTÉ television this weekend, and of course on radio and online, all the build up throughout the week. If you're going over, enjoy it. If you're watching it at home, enjoy it as well.